Mons, Belgium, January 1996. Winter grips the city in darkness and cold. A garbage bag is discovered, floating in a canal or abandoned along a roadside. Inside is something that will change this city forever. Human remains. A woman. Dismembered. The discovery sends shockwaves through the region. Who is she? Who would do this? What kind of monster walks these streets? Police arrive, investigations begin, evidence is collected. But this is only the beginning. By August 1997, 4 more garbage bags will be found. 5 women will have been murdered. 5 bodies will have been cut apart and scattered like trash across the landscape of Mons. And the person responsible will never be found. This is the story of a killer who operated in plain sight. A killer who knew his victims. A killer who may have walked past them on the street. A killer who, despite the most intensive investigation Belgium had ever mounted, slipped through the fingers of justice. This is the case of the Butcher of Mons, a city gripped by fear. Mons is not a large city. It is a regional hub in Belgium, a place where trains arrive and depart, where travelers pass through, where local residents work and live. It has the feel of a city where everyone knows everyone, where strangers stand out, where crime is uncommon. But in January 1996, that sense of safety shattered. The discovery of the first remains triggered an immediate police response. Forensic teams were dispatched. The area was cordoned off. Photographs were taken. Evidence was collected. The remains were carefully preserved and transported for examination. The victim was female. The victim had been dismembered with what appeared to be considerable skill and knowledge. She had not been treated gently in death. Her body had been cut into pieces, placed in a garbage bag, disposed of like refuse. This was not a crime of passion. This was not a domestic dispute that had gone too far. This was something far more deliberate, far more calculated, far more chilling. Who was she? How long had she been dead? Where had she come from? These questions consumed the police in those early days, but they were not prepared for what was coming. The discovery continues. The discovery of the first body should have been a tragedy, should have been a murder investigation. But as weeks turned into months, and months turned into a year, the true horror of what had happened in Mons became apparent. More garbage bags were found. More remains appeared. By August 1997, 5 confirmed victims had been discovered. 5 women, all dismembered, all found in garbage bags, some in canals, some along roadsides, some in locations that suggested they had been transported and deliberately placed for disposal. The killer, or killers, investigators couldn't be certain, had treated the dead with a level of callousness that suggested not just violence, but contempt. Not just murder, but dehumanization. 5 women erased from existence, 5 bodies fragmented, 5 families left, wondering what had happened to their loved ones. The police now faced a crisis. They had a serial killer on their hands, a killer who had claimed 5 victims in less than 2 years, a killer who had operated with enough skill and care to avoid immediate detection, a killer who might be planning to claim a 6th victim. Time was running out. The victims, invisible until they disappeared. The 5 known victims were not selected at random. Although each woman had her own story, they shared striking similarities that suggested the killer was following a deliberate pattern rather than acting on impulse. Every victim was a woman living under difficult circumstances, making them especially vulnerable to someone looking for easy targets. They came from fragile backgrounds. Some struggled financially, while others lived isolated lives with little support from family or close friends. They were the kind of people society often overlooked, women trying to get through each day without attracting attention. Their lives were shaped by hardship, uncertainty, and limited opportunities, leaving them exposed to anyone willing to exploit their vulnerability. All of them were connected to the same areas around the Belgian city of Mons. They were familiar faces near the train station, in local cafes, and in bars where people gathered to escape loneliness or find temporary companionship. Their routines overlapped, and they moved through the same neighborhoods every day. To an ordinary observer, these similarities might have seemed insignificant. To a predator, they represented opportunity. The killer appeared to understand these women better than anyone realized. He knew where they spent their time. He knew their daily habits. He knew which streets they walked, which places they visited, and perhaps even when they would be alone. Most importantly, he understood that their disappearances would not immediately trigger a large-scale search. These were not wealthy or influential women, surrounded by large circles of relatives. They were not people whose absence would instantly dominate newspaper headlines. Many lived on the margins of society, where loneliness and poverty often meant fewer people noticed when someone simply stopped showing up. That tragic reality made them ideal targets. The killer seemed to recognize a painful truth about society, that some victims receive less attention than others. He preyed on women whose lives had already been made difficult by poverty, isolation, and instability. He relied on the assumption that they would not be reported missing right away, giving him valuable time to hide his crimes before anyone began asking questions. This was not random violence. It was calculated. The pattern suggested planning, patience, and careful observation. Rather than attacking impulsively, the killer likely watched his victims beforehand. He may have learned their routines, identified moments when they were alone, and waited until the circumstances favored him. Some investigators believe that at least some of the women may have known their killer before they disappeared. Perhaps they had spoken with him before. Perhaps he appeared friendly or trustworthy. It is even possible that some willingly entered his company, never imagining the danger they were facing. If that was the case, it made the betrayal even more horrifying. Whatever happened during those final moments, each woman's life ended in unimaginable violence. The condition in which investigators discovered the victims made identifying them incredibly difficult. Time, decomposition, and the deliberate actions of the killer complicated the investigation. In several cases, forensic experts faced enormous challenges piecing together evidence and confirming identities. Every discovery painted a clearer picture of the brutality involved, while also highlighting the determination of the killer to conceal his crimes. Behind every victim was a real person, a daughter, a sister, a friend, someone whose life mattered, even if society had often failed to recognize it. Their names deserve to be remembered, not because of the way they died, but because they were individuals with hopes, struggles, and futures that were stolen from them. The investigation would eventually focus on finding the person responsible, but it is important not to lose sight of those who suffered the greatest loss. These women were more than victims in a criminal case. They were human beings whose disappearances exposed the dangers faced by the most vulnerable members of society. 5 women, 5 lives taken far too soon, 5 families left searching for answers, and a community forced to confront the unsettling reality that someone had deliberately chosen. Victims who were almost invisible until they disappeared forever. The investigation, Corpus. The discovery of multiple victims sent shockwaves through Belgium. Investigators immediately realized they were not dealing with isolated crimes or random acts of violence. The evidence pointed towards something far more disturbing: a serial killer who had murdered repeatedly, concealed the bodies, and managed to avoid detection for months. As the investigation unfolded, one horrifying fact became clear. The victims had not died by chance. Someone had hunted them. Someone had taken the time to hide their crimes with chilling precision. Faced with this unprecedented situation, Belgian authorities knew that an ordinary police investigation would not be enough. The scale and complexity of the case demanded a coordinated response unlike anything the country had seen before. To meet that challenge, law enforcement created a specialized task force dedicated entirely to solving the murders. They called it Operation Corpus. The name came from the Latin word corpus, meaning body. It was a grim but fitting title. Every step of the investigation revolved around human remains, recovering them, identifying them, and uncovering the person responsible for treating human lives as though they were nothing more than objects to be discarded. Operation Corpus quickly became one of the largest criminal investigations in Belgian history. Experienced detectives from across the country were brought together. Forensic specialists, homicide investigators, pathologists, and crime scene experts combined their knowledge in an effort to understand a killer unlike any they had encountered before. Every available resource was mobilized. Investigators worked long hours, often around the clock, determined to prevent another murder. Hundreds of leads were examined. Witnesses were interviewed repeatedly. Missing person reports were reviewed in detail, while forensic laboratories carefully analyzed every fragment of evidence recovered from the crime scenes. the investigation soon became the focus of national attention. Newspapers followed every development. Television broadcasts reported each new discovery. Across Belgium, people watched with growing fear and concern, wondering who could commit such horrifying crimes while remaining completely hidden. Despite the enormous effort, progress was painfully slow. The crime scenes presented investigators with challenges they had rarely faced before. The killer had taken deliberate steps to make identification difficult and to destroy valuable evidence. Many of the remains had been exposed to the elements, while others had been intentionally concealed or scattered, making forensic examination incredibly complicated. Each discovery raised new questions instead of providing clear answers. Investigators had to determine not only how the victims had died, but also when they had been killed, where the murders had taken place, and how the bodies had been transported and disposed of afterward. This required forensic techniques that were still evolving during the late 20th century. The science of criminal investigation was advancing rapidly, but cases involving serial killers were still relatively rare in Belgium. Many detectives had never encountered crimes of this scale or complexity. Recognizing that they were entering unfamiliar territory, Belgian authorities made an unusual decision. Rather than relying solely on domestic expertise, they sought international assistance. They reached out to one of the world's most experienced law enforcement agencies, the Federal Bureau of Investigation in the United States. At the time, the FBI had earned international recognition for its work in studying serial offenders and violent criminals. Its specialists had developed methods for analyzing crime scenes, identifying behavioral patterns, and building psychological profiles that could help narrow the search for unknown suspects. Belgian investigators hoped that fresh perspectives might reveal details they had overlooked. American criminal behavior specialists traveled to Belgium to assist with the investigation. Working alongside Belgian detectives, they carefully examined every available piece of evidence. They reviewed autopsy reports, studied photographs of the crime scenes, and analyzed the methods used to dispose of the victims. Every action taken by the killer was treated as a clue, not only to what had happened, but to who the murderer might be. The specialists looked beyond fingerprints and physical evidence. They focused on behavior. Why were the victims chosen? Why were the bodies disposed of in a particular way? What did the level of organization reveal about the killer? Was he acting alone? Did he know the victims personally? What could his actions reveal about his personality, occupation, or daily life? By studying these questions, investigators hoped to understand the mind behind the murders. The result was a detailed behavioral profile designed to guide the investigation. Rather than identifying a specific suspect, the profile described the type of person most likely responsible, someone whose habits, personality, and actions matched the evidence left behind. It gave investigators a new direction. Although the profile was not proof, it became one of the most valuable investigative tools available. Combined with forensic evidence and traditional police work, it helped narrow the search and brought detectives one step closer to identifying the person responsible. Operation Corpus demonstrated how modern criminal investigations rely on far more than physical evidence alone. It became a landmark case that combined forensic science, behavioral analysis, and international cooperation in the pursuit of one of Belgium's most elusive and dangerous killers. The investigation was far from over, but for the first time, investigators believed they were beginning to understand not just how the murders had been committed, but who might have committed them. The profile. The FBI's behavioral profile of the Butcher of Mons was both disturbing and remarkably detailed. After studying the crime scenes, the condition of the victims, and the methods used to conceal the murders, investigators attempted to understand not only what the killer had done, but what kind of person could have committed such crimes. According to the profile, the killer was most likely a man. Investigators believed he possessed significant physical strength, enough to overpower women who may have tried to resist. The victim's circumstances suggested that the offender had control over his attacks and was capable of carrying out acts of extreme violence without losing command of the situation. But physical strength was only one part of the picture. The FBI believed the killer also had some form of anatomical knowledge or experience handling human or animal bodies. The way the victims had been dismembered suggested more than random brutality. It appeared methodical, deliberate, and controlled. This raised important questions. Was the killer someone who worked in medicine? Could he have been a surgeon, a medical worker, or someone familiar with human anatomy? Was he a butcher who understood cutting techniques? Could he have been a hunter who had experience preparing animals after a kill? Or perhaps someone with military training, especially experience related to field medicine or handling injuries? Investigators did not know the answer, but they believed the killer's actions reflected knowledge that an average person would not possess. The profile also suggested that the murderer likely had access to a private location, where the crimes could be carried out without interruption. The process of dismembering and disposing of remains would have required time, space, and a certain level of control. It was unlikely that such acts could have been performed somewhere completely exposed. The FBI considered the possibility that the killer had access to a basement, workshop, warehouse, garage, or another isolated location where suspicious activity would not immediately attract attention. The location would likely have provided privacy. It may have had access to water or cleaning facilities. It may have allowed the killer to remove evidence and hide the traces of his crimes. Perhaps most importantly, it would have been a place where sounds of struggle or violence would not easily reach neighbors or passers-by. This suggested that the offender was not acting randomly. He likely had a controlled environment where he felt comfortable and secure. Another important part of the profile focused on the killer's knowledge of Mons and the surrounding areas. Investigators believed he was familiar with the region. He appeared to understand where bodies could be left without being discovered immediately. He knew the roads, isolated locations, canals, and areas where discarded remains might not attract immediate attention. This indicated planning. The killer was not simply disposing of evidence wherever possible. He appeared to understand the environment around him and use that knowledge to delay discovery. The FBI also suggested that the offender may have had some connection to his victims. This was one of the most unsettling conclusions. The profile indicated that the killer might not have been a complete stranger who attacked random women on the street. Instead, he may have been someone who could approach them naturally, someone who could enter their lives without immediately creating fear. He may have been familiar. He may have appeared trustworthy. He may have shared conversations with his victims before turning against them. The women chosen by the killer were vulnerable, and that vulnerability may have allowed him to get close without raising suspicion. The profile painted a picture of a calculated offender, someone patient, organized, and capable of blending into everyday society. He was not described as someone who acted purely out of uncontrolled rage. Instead, investigators believed he was someone who planned, prepared, and carefully managed the aftermath of his crimes. He had knowledge, he had opportunity, and most frighteningly, he may have been someone who could walk among the people of Mons without anyone realizing what he was capable of. The FBI profile did not reveal his identity, but it provided investigators with something just as valuable: a clearer understanding of the person they were hunting. A killer who was not hiding in the shadows as a complete outsider. A killer who may have been closer than anyone imagined. The investigation deepens. Armed with this profile, the Corpus Task Force began an unprecedented investigation. Nearly 1,700 tips poured in from the public. Each one was investigated. Each one was analyzed. Did this person match the profile? Did they have the right profession? Did they have access to the right locations? Did they know the victims? Had they been seen in the bars and train station areas where the victims had frequented? Investigators worked methodically through the tips. Many led nowhere. Some were interesting, but ultimately inconclusive. But then, one suspect emerged from the mass of information who seemed to match the profile almost perfectly. This man had the right background. He had a profession or experience that involved cutting. He had knowledge of anatomy or butchering. He had access to locations where bodies could be handled without detection. He moved through Mons regularly. He may have known some of the victims. The evidence was circumstantial. The evidence was suggestive. The evidence pointed toward him. But it was not definitive proof. Then something happened that made this suspect even more interesting. A bar regular, someone who frequented one of the same establishments where the victims were known to drink, came forward with an extraordinary claim. This person said that they had overheard the suspect making a confession. In a moment of drunken candor, the suspect had allegedly admitted to the murders. He had supposedly confessed to being the one who had killed those women. This was potentially the breakthrough the investigation needed. This was a confession. This was an admission of guilt from the suspect's own mouth. Hope surged through the task force. Justice seemed within reach. But law and procedure are not always generous to the pursuit of truth, the breakdown of justice. The confession that had been overheard in a bar was hearsay. It was secondhand evidence. It was what one person claimed to have heard another person say. In a court of law, such evidence carries minimal weight. For a prosecution to move forward, they would need more than an alleged confession overheard by a bar regular. They would need physical evidence. They would need DNA connecting the suspect to the crime scenes or the victims. They would need witness testimony, someone willing to testify under oath that they had heard the confession. They would need a solid chain of evidence that would withstand legal scrutiny. The suspect's defense, predictably, was denial. He denied knowing the victims. He denied being in the locations where the murders had occurred. He denied killing anyone. He denied the confession entirely. Without physical evidence that would hold up in court, without witnesses willing to testify under oath, without DNA technology that could definitively place him at a crime scene, the Belgian prosecutors found themselves in an impossible position. They could suspect him. They could believe he was guilty, but they could not charge him. And so, the suspect walked free. No formal charges were ever brought. No trial took place. No conviction was secured. The man who matched the FBI profile so perfectly, the man who had allegedly confessed to the murders, remained free, protected by the very legal system designed to ensure fair trials for all, but which in this case protected a potential murderer from prosecution. It was a failure of justice, a failure that haunted Belgium for decades. The cold case. Decades pass. Years passed. The 1990s became the 2000s. The 2000s became the 2010s. The case of the Butcher of Mons faded from immediate public attention, though it never truly disappeared. Corpus remained technically active. The case remained technically open. Investigators periodically reviewed the evidence, hoping that some new lead might emerge. Some new technology might provide the breakthrough that had eluded them. The families of the victims lived with an unimaginable burden. They did not know who had killed their loved ones. They did not have closure. They did not have a final resolution. They lived in a state of perpetual uncertainty, knowing that someone had murdered their family member, but not knowing who. Knowing that the killer might still be alive. Knowing that he might never face justice. The suspect, if he was indeed the killer, moved through life a free man. He walked the streets of Mons. He may have passed family members of his victims without acknowledgement. He may have lived with the knowledge of his crimes, or he may have denied them even to himself. But he was free. This is the nature of unsolved murders. This is the cruel reality of justice systems that require a standard of proof that, while necessary to prevent wrongful conviction, can sometimes allow guilty people to escape accountability. Revival and hope. As the 21st century progressed, something unexpected happened. Interest in the case was revived. True crime documentaries brought the story of the Butcher of Mons to new audiences. Victims' rights organizations renewed calls for justice. Podcasts discussed the case. Online forums analyzed the evidence. The case, which had been cold for decades, suddenly had new life. More importantly, technology had advanced in ways that had seemed impossible in 1996. DNA science had become far more sophisticated. Cold case units and police departments across Europe began re-examining cases with new tools and new methodologies. Evidence that had been inconclusive in the 1990s might now yield definitive results. If investigators could re-examine evidence from the crime scenes, if they could run DNA against the suspect, if they could develop new forensic connections, they might finally have the proof that had eluded them before. But there was a ticking clock. The statute of limitations loomed. Belgian law provided a deadline after which a crime could no longer be prosecuted, regardless of guilt. As that deadline approached, the pressure to solve the case intensified. If the killer was not identified and charged before that deadline passed, he would be protected by law from prosecution forever. Justice would be impossible. The mystery remains. Decades after the murders, the Butcher of Mons remains one of Belgium's most haunting unsolved mysteries. 5 women were murdered, 5 bodies were dismembered, 5 families were devastated, 5 killer was never formally brought to justice. 1 suspect matched the FBI profile. 1 suspect had allegedly confessed. 1 suspect may be the most likely candidate for the murders, but suspicion is not proof. Probability is not conviction, and without the legal standard of evidence required for prosecution, that suspect remains free. The case of the Butcher of Mons stands as a stark reminder of the limits of justice systems. It shows us that even with dedicated investigators, even with FBI profiling, even with nearly 1,700 tips and decades of investigation, some cases remain unsolved. It shows us that evil can hide in plain sight, that a killer can live among his victims' families and friends without being caught, that a person can commit the most heinous acts and escape accountability if the legal system cannot provide definitive proof of guilt. And it shows us the anguish of families left without closure, families who know that someone murdered their loved one, but who may never know the answer to the most fundamental question: who and why? The Butcher of Mons represents a failure of justice, but it also represents something else: the resilience of investigation, the dedication of law enforcement, the commitment of societies to never stop seeking the truth, even when that truth remains frustratingly out of reach. The case remains technically open. The statute of limitations approaches. Time is running out, not just for investigation, but for justice itself. If the killer is identified after the deadline, he will walk free forever, protected by law from accountability. It is a sobering thought. It is a reminder that sometimes, despite our best efforts, despite our most advanced technologies, despite our most brilliant investigators, justice remains elusive. 5 women died at the hands of the Butcher of Mons. Their names have become synonymous with unsolved mystery. Their deaths remain unavenged. Their killer remains unknown. But they are not forgotten. The case continues. The investigation persists. And somewhere in Belgium, investigators still hold out hope that someday, somehow, the truth will finally emerge. This is the story of the Butcher of Mons, a killer who has never been caught, a mystery that has never been solved, a case that remains one of Belgium's darkest and most haunting unsolved crimes. And perhaps one day justice will finally arrive, even if it arrives too late for those 5 women whose lives were stolen and whose bodies were scattered like trash across the landscape of Mons.